Last time, Rome nearly collapsed in the crisis of the 3rd century, but it had miraculously survived being divided in at least 3 parts. But today Western Rome will nearly fall a century earlier. Barbarians will actually sack Rome for the first time in 700 years, and we'll have some one-sided OE too. Wait, Western Rome? What's happened to just Rome? Great question. Emperor Theodosius realized that Rome was way too overextended. Thus, upon his death in 395, the empire was finally split. But both halves were proved to have inherited Rome's will to live. Though the West inherited more of the problems than the East did. Their will to survive, they were proved in the very same year thanks to a Visigoth called Alaric, my favorite Fallen Eagle starting character. He was only 25 at the time, but the new chief of the Visigoths, who settled within the eastern Roman province of Moesia as foederati. Basically barbarians that were allowed to live in the Roman Empire in exchange for serving in the army and thus protecting the empire's frontiers. Alaric kind of hated the Eastern Empire because they used Goths as cannon fodder. With they, I mean Emperor Theodosius of the United Roman Empire. You know, the guy whose death in 395 marked the division of the empire. The East was to be ruled by his 18-year-old son, Arcadius, and the West by his 10-year-old son, Honorius. Remember Honorius, who got down as the worst emperor Rome had ever seen despite being so unknown. You could even say he was the main culprit behind the fall of Western Rome. So they both weren't that capable. So Honorius was under the guardianship of Flavius Stilicho, a brilliant general of Vandalic background that would prove to be crucial to the story. This shows that the so-called barbarians weren't just brutish invaders, but often assimilated into Roman society. They had a genuine interest in being allowed to live in the Roman Empire. While Rome was declining, it was still a prosperous civilization, with many innovations and technology the Germanic tribes did not have. I guess you could call it the Roman dream. Besides, they wanted safety from the Huns, who were ravaging many of these lands the Germanics came from. At least that was the justification. The Huns were more than just brutal invaders destroying everything they came across. No, that wouldn't result in a lasting empire. They didn't just drive peoples away, they integrated them. But opinions were divided among the Germanics, and either way, the Huns would prove crucial later. Now Stilicho will turn out to be our main character, almost more important than Alaric. Arcadius in the East was to be influenced by Praefectus Praetorio Rufinus. He was to have it rough. Just shoot me already. Now, Alaric wasn't a fan of pretty much being a mistreated Roman vassal, not an independent king for his people, but at least one under better terms. So he began his rampage, marching on Constantinople, thankfully being defeated, then devastating Greece, during which he even sacked Athens' port and ravaged other cities like Sparta. How was he stopped? For that, we need to travel to Illyricum. Now, Illyricum was actually split between the Eastern and Western Empire. It belonged to the West, until the West handed it over around 380 to help the East with an earlier war against the Goths. Illyricum was the Roman province providing the most soldiers. The West now wanted it back, but the East rejected that. Imagine you just loaned your most important recruitment ground to them, despite having a more dangerous and unstable frontier, and they refused to give it back. In fact, this issue led to a sort of rivalry between the two empires, which would later result in a huge blunder on Stilicho's part. In 395, the West under Stilicho actually sent troops to assist against Alaric officially. But in reality, Stilicho wanted Illyricum back, so the Eastern Empire sent him back home because they hadn't asked for help, or rather, an invasion. 2 years later, he would try again landing in southern Greece under the pretense of fighting Alaric. He did so, defeated the Goths, but decided not to finish them off. No, not in that way. Get your head out of the gutter, I meant not routing them. He probably was coordinated with Alaric to have a justification to invade the East. He was then declared public enemy number 1 by the East and had to return to the West, because a revolt in Africa broke out, Western Rome's grain supply. So yeah, Stilicho wanted to weaken the East. Who could do that? Alaric. That's why he didn't finish off the Goths. He saw Alaric as a potential ally. Now, because Stilicho didn't finish the job, the Eastern Empire had to stop the Goths somehow, who were chilling in Epirus, so roughly modern Albania and parts of Greece. So that means, in 398, the Eastern Emperor placated Alaric and his Goths, making him the Magister Militum of Illyricum. Crisis averted, right? Okay, that sure was a crisis, but not quite an existential threat. The fun begins now. Actually, it began a year ago. Tell me, which Western Roman province do you think was the richest? Italia, the heartland of the empire, maybe Spain and its mines, Gaul and its snail-eating snobs? All good guesses, and none of them are technically incorrect. But in my opinion, it was Africa, not the continent of course. That would be a very large province, but the area around modern-day Tunisia. It was the Egypt of the West, Rome's Ukraine, the breadbasket of the empire. If that supply were to be cut off, Western Rome would be doomed unless order is restored. The Amazigh Count of Africa Gildo stopped the dildo supply. Oops, I meant grain supply. Freudian slip. Anyhow, it was an open rebellion. The Senate declared him a public enemy. Ships sailed to Africa led by Gildo's brother, Mascastle. It was in 398, but the war that was to commence was to change the fate of Rome forever. It was to be an epic battle, one told of throughout the ages. Still today in the streets of Tunis, you hear songs of a battle between Gildo and Mascastle. Yeah, actually no. Gildo was crushed and the 70k man army melted away like butter while cooking the healthiest American dish. Crisis averted. If this rebellion had gone differently, maybe the Western Empire wouldn't have survived the events about to happen, but at least Africa was safe. For now. Also, Mascastle was soon murdered, possibly by Stilicho. What a way to repay him. So things seem to be going alright for the Western Empire. In 400 it even got Illyricum back. Provinces of the East would no longer need to entertain Alaric as Magister Militum per Illyricum. But the shit show was about to commence. Remember when I said Stilicho made a blunder by not decimating the Goths? That was gonna bite him in the ass now, in the year 401. Rome will actually fall into barbarian hands for the first time since the Celtic leader Brennus sacked Rome over 700 years ago. Alaric invaded Italy after the Vandals and Alans. Don't ask me what Ossetians were doing in Western Europe. Invade Raetia and Illyricum, so the Alps. Stilicho was desperate for men. No, not in the gay where he only had eyes for Alaric, I think. But yeah, he moved his troops from the Rhine to the Alps. In other words, the only thing defending the Rhine was a plague saying, don't attack or we'll attack you back later. Trust. While Raetia and Illyricum were declining, there were still important recruitment grounds. Thus they were Stilicho's base of support. How did the invasion go? Alaric took the capture of Rome. No, not Rome. Rome wasn't the capital of Rome at this point. Though Rome was Rome's capital before, and Rome was still Rome's spiritual capital. No, the capital was Milan. And sadly, Emperor Honorius' mantle fleet is still alive. You will later understand why I hate Honorius. Honorius was besieged in modern-day Asti, and Stilicho finally met Alaric in battle. Two actually. The Battle of Pollentia and the Battle of Verona, both in 402. These battles would prove to be a Roman victory. And Stilicho let Alaric retreat again. Does he never learn? Guess the gamble of having Alaric as an ally against the East was more important. He actually even made him comatose, but why am I telling you this if I promised earlier Rome was to be sacked? Another barbarian invaded Italy, mainly the Ostrogoths under Radagaisus. Wait no, Radagaisus in 405. So Stilicho had to relocate troops from Gaul to fight him. This surely won't have any consequences later. Now Stilicho did defeat him. Then Radagaisus was executed on August 23rd, 406, and a triumphal arch was erected in Rome. Stilicho was truly a hero. And this invasion actually had some benefits for the West. It gained many new soldiers, because the Gothic general, Sarus, fled to Rome's side. Rome had thus gained a capable general and many new troops for little casualties. But now Stilicho had to rely on troops from Britannia and recruited 12,000 men from his defeated enemy. That might have made his army around half as a Gothic, not to mention the rest of his forces weren't fully Roman either. So yes, the West was getting quite weak despite the new recruits. The entire Roman system was centered around the army after all. And I didn't even mention all the rebellions taking place. One rebellion in Britain will become important soon. Now guess who invaded Illyricum again, or ever marched towards Illyricum. Might again have been coordinated with Stilicho, but yes, it's of course Alaric. He wanted gold, Stilicho wanted to pay him the gold, the Senate wanted to fight him, but Stilicho ignored them and gave Alaric 4,000 pieces of gold anyway. Alaric's justification was that he wanted reimbursement for the Epirus fiasco. You remember when Stilicho tried to invade Greece? He actually sent Alaric to do that again right around the same time Radagaisus was defeated. So, in my personal opinion, Alaric's demands were honestly justified, even if this might piss off some of the Roma boos that think so-called barbarians invading Rome were always in the wrong. Also, Stilicho going against the Senate to pay Alaric? You could make a great toxic yaoi out of Stilicho and Alaric, I think. Definitely one-side love on Stilicho's part. There's no other explanation. This, I mean the bribe, not the yaoi, pissed off Roman aristocrats who had to contribute to financing this bribe after all. In other news, the rebellion in Britain turned out to be the Gallic Empire all over again. If you don't get that reference, I recommend watching the previous part. Constantine III emerged as a usurper and controlled Britannia and Gaul. At the same time, Germanic tribes crossed the Rhine into Gaul as invaders. Stilicho had to face this usurper, but not personally. He feared Alaric rebelling if he went to face this threat before Alaric would regain his office as Magister Militum per Illyricum. In his place he sent the general Sarus, who got his ass kicked and barely made it out alive. Didn't know the Alps were full of bandits, and they were stealing Jewish gold and hoarding other illegal funds. Well no, that was the Swiss. But yeah, sucks to be Western Rome right now. It was truly a very dire time for the Western Empire. Now what about the Eastern Empire? There, Emperor Arcadius died on the 1st of May 408, being replaced by son Theodosius the Great. Stilicho might have planned to march east and install a regime loyal to himself, and also to give his one true love, Alaric, a senior position. Stilicho needed Alaric and Illyricum to ward off and even fight the east, while Alaric needed Stilicho for legitimacy. However, a coup took place while Stilicho was outside the capital. One against his supporters, his troops including General Cyrus wanted to fight the coupists, but Stilicho refused because the emperor was unharmed. Cyrus called him a cuck for that. Okay, not really, but he probably thought so. Long story short, Stilicho had to flee from his own troops and was beheaded on Honorius' order on August 22nd, 408. That's why I hate Honorius. He killed one of the best generals Rome ever had. But honestly, can you blame him that much? Put yourself in his shoes. You're Honorius. First of all, my condolences. Keep yourself safe. But from your perspective, Stilicho kept letting Alaric get away just so Alaric could maybe fight your own brother and then nephew in the east. Stilicho also clearly wanted more power and influence. It even seemed like he wanted to use Alaric to conquer Macedonia and Dacia. Dacia at this point moved to Serbia, by the way. Additionally, Stilicho was unpopular among the aristocracy. Many were calling for his death. So I can't say I don't understand Honorius. What would you have done in his shoes? Comment, life or death for Army Boy. During the same time, Alaric was again declared a public enemy by the emperor. Remember, Alaric didn't actually want to destroy the empire. He wanted a place for people within the framework of the Roman Empire. He wanted a public office and to be recognized as a Roman general. It was the Romans who often broke the guarantees to the foederati. But a public enemy of course has no legitimacy, no matter whether he was in the right or not. But Alaric made the emperor an offer. In exchange for some money and the title of Comes, which he lost with Stilicho's death, he would move to Pannonia. This offer was refused because Alaric was seen as a supporter of Stilicho. They just had a very special relationship, you know? Thus, Alaric invaded Italy. Honorius made Constantine, you remember, the British usurper, his co-emperor, to solve a revolt in Britain and Gaul problem, but that worked out in a mediocre manner. In 408, Alaric besieged Rome. He made it to the Eternal City. The last time Rome was this close to being captured by a foreign invader was 600 years earlier, by Hannibal in the Second Punic War. And in 410 he finally succeeded. He sacked Rome and slaughtered all of the civilians. Except no, he didn't. He was led inside by an unknown person. As a Christian king he also spared most churches, but yeah, lots of looting over the course of 3 days. But no mass murder at least. And looting was mostly limited to public buildings, like the Imperial Palace. So this barbarian was more civilized than the Roman Empire itself in some regards. Then Alaric marched south, probably wanting to conquer Africa. But like many conquests, died of disease right before shit was about to get interesting. I would argue that this cycle was the beginning of the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But Western Rome won't die without a fight. It refused to die. Its fall in the 5th century wasn't inevitable. But you know what it did let die? Its presence in Britannia. Honorius ignored a Romano-Briton call for help against Celtic raids in 410. Thus, the Roman presence gradually faded away. The next year Constantine, the British usurper turned co-emperor, abdicated and was then murdered. Oh yeah, speaking about fading Roman presence, so many barbarians were invading that Rome gave some of them some land. And pretty much independence in areas it didn't deem all too strategic. A bit of a blow, but to me it seems like buying time rather than cowardly giving up. There were so many invasions that fighting them all at once would have been impossible. Fallen eagle players might understand. So more land was granted to barbarians, and look at the map, the empire is even smaller now. But those weren't that important regions. Unlike Africa. Oh Africa. Now the fall truly begins. More on the struggle for Africa in the next part.